panel, which refers to the historic cities and city centers. It is my honor to convey to you the address of the Mayor of Athens, Mr. Kostas Bakoyannis, who was unable to participate due to some urgent needs of the city. However, we prepared the City of Athens participation in the actual activities of regenerating the historic cities. We met him with Bonnie Burnham, and it was a very interesting discussion. So I convey to you a very important message that Athens is present. And I have the honor to invite my good friend and a great lady, Liminaidis, advisor to the Secretary General of the Organization of World Heritage Cities, to take the floor and moderate this panel. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you very much, Donia, dear friend of many, many years. So, first of all, thank you, Tonya, for the invitation to take part for the second time in this conference, the second edition, and to your team, with your guidance for the great organization. It's quite a task to pull all of this together. And this panel discussion, as Tonya has already said, will deal with historic cities and centers, new reuse and preservation strategies, applying circular economy. Now, I would like to introduce the panelists who will contribute to this discussion. And as Tonya already mentioned, due to other commitments that just came up, we will not have the mayor of Athens with us, Kostas Bakoyannis, but we will have, and do have, rather, Ms. Bonnie Burnham, the Cultural Heritage Finance Alliance president, and former president and current President Emerita of the World Monuments Fund. The alternate minister as well was called to Parliament, so we will not have the honor and pleasure of his company today and contribution, but we are very, very pleased to have the Secretary General for Tourism Policy and Development of the Hellenic Republic, Ms. Vicky Loizo, who will be with us. Unfortunately, Maria Gravari Barba will not be able to join us today from Paris, and the representative of the Mayor of Rhodes, Stefanos Drakos, who is the Vice Mayor for the medieval city of Rhodes, will represent him. We do have the Professor Emeritus, Eleni Maestru. Hello, Eleni, so good to see you. From the Technical University of Athens, and the Society for the Environmental and Cultural Heritage, and as well the Council of Architectural Heritage President. And of course, no panel would be complete without our dear Antonia Moropoulou. As well, we have with us online Mike Turner, a dear, dear friend, who is professor of the Bezalel Academy of Arts and Design, Jerusalem, and also the UNESCO Chair in Urban Design and Conservation Studies. And then as well, we have Professor Stefano Della Torre of the Polytechnic University of Milan, of the Department of Architecture, Built Environment, and Construction Engineering. And it is great pleasure to have as our rapporteur Harry Kokosis. Here we are, Harry, Professor Emeritus of the University of Thessaly, the Department of Planning and Regional Development, and EC consultant on spatial planning and environment, tourism, sustainable development, insular development, and everything else. Thank you. Bravo. So, I'd like to begin just by setting the scene here, that for centuries, the principles of circular economy have been applied in relation to structures that we classify or consider as built heritage. Contemporary people, that's us, did not invent this idea. We simply conceptualized it. Of course, the reasons for implementing these policies have changed. In the past, especially before industrialization, the cost of construction materials was very expensive for the majority of the population, and the most logical choice was to reuse existing materials and existing buildings instead of constructing new ones. Today, the realization that human activities have caused environmental degradation, destruction of habitats, and alterations to ecosystems that endanger human well-being has led to the pursuit of more sustainable strategies in order to reduce the total resources extracted from the environment and reduce the waste that human activities generate. Moreover, as a result of these activities, historic cities and centers have also suffered degradation and consequently a decrease in the number of residents. Therefore, it is incumbent upon those actors, both in the public and private sectors, to formulate and implement plans to counteract this trend. Our distinguished panel members, each in their area of expertise and experience, will share with us their proposals and actions for the way forward. Now, due to other commitments, scheduling commitments, we will begin with Professor Mike Turner, who must leave us in a short while. So if we could connect with Professor Turner, with Mike, in Jerusalem. Are we there?
Yes, on the WebEx. Can you connect?
Oh, yes.
Well, thank
there.
you. Good afternoon.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
there you are, Mike.
Great.
Carry on.
Right. Thank you. And first of all, once again, kudos to Tonia Moropulo for the second event now for TMM. It is really something quite special, as Lee had also said. And I also thank Lee for preparing this important debate. I've got really three basic points which I want to speak about. One is about changing priorities. Two is the adaptive reuse, or what we wanted to understand in adaptive reuse. And three is the issues of research and knowledge. The first thing which I want to speak about is about the change of priorities. And if I was to take on the World Heritage Convention, not just for World Heritage, but for state parties' responsibilities, the first objective is to adopt a general policy which aims to give the cultural and natural heritage a function in the life of the community and to integrate the protection of that heritage into comprehensive planning programs. So I think that this is the first thing. If we cannot put heritage and into the life of the community, then it's not going to get very far. And I think this is the essence of prioritizing this aspect within the historic centers and recreating new living environments. The part which then adds to this is the dichotomy between culture and development, or heritage and development. And what we're saying it is culture is an enabler for sustainable development, not piggish development, but sustainable development. And culture is an essential part of this development, and this is exactly where we need to actually prepare our main activities. The second point, therefore, is to create then a quality of life, well-being. If we want to have people to continue in the cities, then we have to then make sure that we have then adaptive reuse for the use of the local communities and not for tourism. So when we're thinking about how then the city readapts itself and how it is repackaged, the priority must be for functions which respond to the community life, whether it is schools, whether it is kindergartens, whether it is clinics. These are the essence which must be the uses in the quality of life. And if we take on board the Sustainable Development Goals, 11.4 target says very clearly that it is safeguarding natural and cultural heritage. But that's not the goal, that is a target. The goal is to make our communities safe, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable. So it should read as follows: safeguarding our cultural and natural heritage to make the cities safe and inclusive and sustainable and resilient. In other words, it is a means to an end, and immediately we see that the conservation prepares us for a better understanding of our cities. We're going to have people who are going to care and become custodians of their heritage. The third part is that of research and knowledge. And I'd like to then recall the Historic Urban Landscape recommendation, which was approved in 2011. And here we've got essentially four goals, four tools: the tools of civic engagement, knowledge and planning, regulatory systems, and financial tools. And we actually have to begin to understand these tools and how they can then support the historic urban landscape. And in it, we speak very clearly about the importance of research. And it must be academic and university institutions and other centers of research to develop scientific research on aspects of the landscape approach. And it is essential to document the state of urban areas and their evolution. Over the past 2 days, we've heard some incredible presentations about the documentation of buildings. We are falling behind when we speak about the documentation of heritage at the urban scale. And this is really our challenge, which we need to go. And if I was then to go back to the convention then says, after the third point, to develop scientific and technical studies and research to work out operating methods which will make the state capable of counteracting the dangers that threaten its cultural or natural heritage. I rest my case. In other words, the actual World Heritage Convention is not very much about listing about sites, but in fact managing the heritage for the actually community. And this brings us to the life and the research which we need to do. It is beyond the historic center to include culture and nature, urban and rural. And in this way, we can create then a better way forward and integrate then research activities in providing for a sustainable historic centers. Over.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you very much. And the way in which you divided into three, the priorities and the adaptive reuse, the change in priorities rather, the adaptive reuse, and also research and knowledge. And the whole idea, and this is something that in the organization of World Heritage Cities, the striving to maintain our cultural heritage, our built heritage, within the mainstream life of the city and giving new functions to these buildings. And also you touched on something that is very important to us as well, the quality of life, the livability. And of course this will be the theme of the next World Congress of our organization, enhancing livability in World Heritage Cities, which is also very important. And of course, your reference to Hull, the Historic Urban Landscape recommendation of how cities should and could develop, and the balance between development and preservation, and of course your emphasis on research. And this is a topic that we have been talking about for quite a while. And as I mentioned 2 days ago, that one of the concepts from one of our earlier World Congresses, which was held in Rhodes in 2003, and that Tonya, where Tonya served as chair of the scientific committee, was that cities should be open labs for research and for the implementations of policies. So thank you very, very much, Mike. Do we have any either questions or comments from anyone? No? At the moment? All right. Thank you so very much, Mike. It was quite complete. So now we will move to the Secretary General for Tourism Policy and Development, Ms. Vicky Loiseau. Vicky, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this conference on circular economy, and specifically on this in this panel on historic cities and centers. Actually, it is historic cities and centers which are a traditional tourism product. So it is for us a priority for further develop this product. And at the Ministry, it is a priority to create an advanced tourism product which integrates nature, people, culture, and history. And it is exactly this that we want when talking about historic cities, that we want to integrate all this into an unforgettable experience for the visitor. But this cannot be done without taking into account the global trends or the global crisis. And we are now facing two global crises, climate crisis and the COVID-19 crisis. So both actually dictate us the way forward. And despite the fact that we talk about a crisis or two crises, actually, it is an opportunity for us to take into account all the new trends that the visitors have showed us. It is slow tourism or quality tourism, the new trends for the visitors. And circular economy is a priority, so as to really have a sustainable development for tourism. At the Ministry, we have a 10-year strategy for sustainable development, for sustainable tourism development that we are planning, so as to actually make tourism fit for the future. This is what we say. We want to make tourism more resilient, more accessible, more diversified, more digital, of course, but mainly more sustainable. And we understand that circularity leads to sustainability, but the opposite is not always the case. But it is really important to understand that we need to draw the lessons needed to be learned and to start designing the future tourism ecosystem, taking into account all the major milestones as concerned as food waste reduction or energy efficiency or other values of circular economy. And it is really important to understand that sustainable development has 3 dimensions. Apart from economic and environmental, it also has the social dimension, which is really important to us. I'm very happy today because I'm coming straight from the Parliament, where we have a new law where destination management and marketing organizations have been set. This law will be adopted next Monday, and it really gives the opportunity to have a local and regional strategy so as to monitor these circular economy initiatives and give the opportunity for the cities and the historic cities mostly to promote sustainability. It is also the National Observatory for Sustainable Development, for Sustainable Tourism Development, which is included in this new law. And we believe that it will play a major role providing all the necessary data that we need for policy design towards these new tourism ecosystem that we want to create, taking into account, of course, the principles of circularity. Last but not last, I would like to highlight the importance of educating ourselves, the visitors, and establishing rules for what we really believe so as to lessen environmental and ecological damages caused by tourism and sometimes over-tourism. It is really important to create the standards. That's why we work together with the Hellenic Chamber of Hotels so as to create a new certification process. Let's say something like green stars for hotels. We are now designing this new certification, and we also want to highlight the social dimension so as to reduce food waste and also work together with the hotels in a new initiative also included in this new law, which is called Hotels 4, and it will give the opportunity to work together with the hotels so as to really work together towards these common new goals of sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vicky. It was very, very interesting, and especially concerning the new legislation and what all, but also that you have voiced and expressed that a priority for cultural tourism, and where else but in Greece, as well as other countries, of course, but could you really have a priority of, and be able to have a priority of cultural tourism. Also, your reference to the crisis. I remember in 2019, I always refer to the Organization of World Heritage Cities, but our World Congress dealt with many aspects of tourism, whatever, one of which was over-tourism, and that was the great problem. And then a year later, it was tourism recovery, rejuvenation, and all of this. And coupled with, of course, the COVID crisis, and it has been a very challenging time for the tourism industry, the travel industry in general, hospitality throughout the world. And but what you have, expressed either through the economic or environmental or social aspects of sustainability, I think really targets, is well focused and well targeted. And again, this new legislation and also bringing in the local and the regional and really taking it down to the, to the grassroots. And the education of visitors, yes. And I think a few years ago, Harry, maybe you remember as well, the World Tourism Organization had, it was a campaign, respect, whatever, the 2 or 3 words, that how visitors should respect the place that they are visiting or whatever. And this is also very, very important. So thank you very, very much. And we will now ask our dear friend Bonnie Burnham to give us her take from her vantage point on what we should do.
Yes?
Sure. Yeah.
You could use it. Huh?
Thank you. Is this it? No, yet. Okay, that goes forward. Hi, thank you. It's very nice to be here at the second convening of this conference. Like many other participants, I was here last time, and at the time I was beginning to dwell on a topic that has been very well summarized by the last speaker in the last session, when he was talking largely about the evolution of cities and how they change and how climate change and those factors has influenced. And he said, when we create uses, we create income. And at the end of in the last conference, my thesis was that the income that was being created through rehabilitation of heritage was not really being directed toward the sustaining of the heritage and the preservation of heritage, and therefore it wasn't a circular proposition, but one that where externalities went to others rather than to the principal source of the regeneration. And so that's been my pursuit for the last couple of years, is working on how successful heritage regeneration programs that have captured those externalities and have created internal growth for the communities, how those worked and what they had in common. And in recent months, some of you may already be aware that the organization that's been created essentially to pursue not only this research but its implementation, called the Cultural Heritage Finance Alliance, which is my new association, looked at successful models that we were aware of. It's a pursuit that could go on as more and more successful case studies emerge, particularly with the greater emphasis that we have today on sustainable development and how cities in particular factor into that. But in any case, we looked at 6 case studies. They're depicted on the screen here. And what we found was, first of all, that their models were all different, that they had arisen out of specific circumstances, often a dire circumstance, when there was really a big threat of loss, unless the community did something to protect and rehabilitate its cultural heritage, and that produced very widespread and resonant results. But within those different models, and you can read about them by looking at the Cultural Heritage Finance Alliance or CHIFO website, and there'll be a reference to it at the end, there were commonalities, and which I'll summarize later. But as a result of dialogue that began when we released these publications in the fall, we were invited by the Inter-American Development Bank to actually build a methodology around what we learned from the case studies. We found that the ones in the middle of the spectrum, which represented a collaborative engagement between government and private sector, were by far the most successful, because they had the result of engaging the community in a way that the ones that were highly driven by government and the ones that were highly driven by private finance on the right-hand side of the spectrum don't have the same level of sustainability. It's up to somebody to turn on or turn off the tap, and when that happens, the program disappears. So I want to summarize the outcome of the research that we conducted subsequently over the last few months about what this model might look like. The projects in the middle of the spectrum here, Mexico City, Amsterdam, the United Kingdom, involved a certain amount of impetus from the government, but they also employ, to some degree, the idea of public-private partnership as is typically understood. I'm arguing for something that's more informal than that. I think public-private partnerships adapt themselves well to certain kinds of projects which have a tangible beginning and an end, and where the private sector partner has a skill set that the government doesn't necessarily have. But from my perspective, the problem is that there is not a point of connection between the public and private sector in communities that's focused on heritage conservation. So the public sector may be doing a great deal in its own silo, and the private sector may be discouraged to some degree that they don't have a bigger role to play, or that they can't get the permits that they need in order to do what they'd like to do. And so my effort is focused on creating a methodology using the same kinds of research and pilot project and urban planning tools that I think almost everyone in this group has to engage between public and private. So I'm going to try to be, after that somewhat long introduction, rather quick. The methodology has 4 stages, which are, again, all classic tools for planning and development. The first stage summarizes what the goal of the initiative is. And the goal of the initiative in this case is not conserving the heritage. The goal of the initiative is creating, is bridging that gap between public and private and nonprofit and civic engagement. And then the second, third, and fourth steps are involved in deepening our ability to address that and implement that strategy. First of all, is a plan that takes certain conclusions that have been drawn and applies them to the urban area. Secondly, a financial model based on 2 or 3 examples of the kinds of urban fabric that one is focused on. And thirdly, a management structure that will help, that will perform a lot of functions to keep this this methodology going in a circular fashion so that it will endure. And then the outcome of that is a whole, a strategy and a framework has been laid down that can then inform the implementation process and hopefully draw more financial resources into it from all sectors. This slide summarizes the vision and strategy process because while it can be very light on the ground and take only a matter of months to implement this stage, all the seeds of evaluating what kind of tools are available in the community, what kind of regulations apply, how well they work, what kind of incentives are available to the public, and the scale of the need are all looked at from a high level, at 3,000 feet, in order to assess the feasibility of a program that would try to encompass the goals of the community and of the heritage preservation in a tangible way. Everybody's been talking about stakeholder engagement. I see it as an ecosystem of people who are bringing both financial resources and non-financial resources, organizational frameworks, research, and personal experiences to the mix. And by bringing them together, you create a kind of vortex of ongoing activity where governmental instruments are used to stimulate private investment. Enablers like organizations that are working with the community are engaged in that, and ultimately there are paths created that help the project find its way to the financial marketplace. Now, a lot of these same ideas are, I would say, replicated serendipitously by a program that the European Union has been running over the last several years. Many of you may be familiar with it, called CLIC, C-L-I-C program, which is about circular reuse of, adaptive reuse of cultural heritage, which also talks about this idea of a virtuous investment circle and how to pull in these various forms of resources for the benefit of the community. Blended capital is all the discussion these days in financial circles, using resources from a range of different sources that are focused on different things. There are huge pools of resources, as we've talked about, for environment, greening of the environment. There are pools of resources for digitization. There are pools of resources for disprivileged communities. And by trying to and there are also different kinds of what in financial circles called a capital stack, different kinds of financial resources that are devoted to different purposes. The heritage sector, from my experience, relies entirely on the innermost of these circles: public funding, intergovernmental funding, let's say in your case the EU, and philanthropy, which, while it may be by chance here a bigger circle than the other ones, tends to be a much smaller circle, a very limited audience in the philanthropic sector for financing heritage preservation. And so my premise is that what is needed to bridge the gap between those established resources and the much bigger pool of capital that exists in the world is an entity devoted to planning this ecosystem and creating the linkages that will make heritage preservation a more attractive proposition for the business community. And that's the one that's depicted in the middle of the chart in yellow. It's early stage capital that in principle would be recoverable as a result of creating more economic activity through reuse. In order to draw private finance into an equation, the financiers need to believe that there's some prospect that they will recover their money at the end of the day and potentially even make money in a financial proposition. And so a very important step in identifying these layers of potential blended capital is mitigating the risk of financial loss. And from my perspective, it would appear to me that there are two primary forms of risk, although there are many that need to be reviewed in relation to cost analysis having to do with environmental issues and things like that. But the two biggest risks are a failure of the public sector to deliver what it needs to deliver in order to enable something to go forward. The delays that often occur and frustrate people who might be participants in this capital pool if they thought that projects would go smoothly and there wouldn't be delays and obstacles to the process. So that the public sector really needs to be there at the table, guaranteeing that it's going to, within the boundaries of acceptable law and practice, that they're going to deliver what's necessary in order to engage the private sector. And secondly, the repayment risk, which really has to do with whether the proposed reuse is going to be economically viable to the extent that it has been projected as being in planning. And you know, hotels are a relatively reliable form of return on investment in terms of reuse of cultural heritage, but the entire ecosystem of what one might be able to adaptively do with historic buildings is much broader and more diverse than that. And so solutions have to be devised that, and ways and forms of financing need to be put together that help to bridge this risk of using a building in a way that's not really going to be economically sustainable, and where investors won't recover their investments in a relatively short period of time. One very satisfactory solution, if it can be implemented, is through guarantees that are provided by, or enabling instruments or incentives that are provided by the government agencies in order to lower that level of risk. And finally, what we learned from these case studies is the critical role of coordination with some entity, in principle a government agency, responsible for making sure that everybody is enabled within this ecosystem to do their part. And so you have a municipal government with its roles in regulatory devices. You have the national government holding the keys to the entire treasury in terms of regulatory authority. And then you have these non-governmental participants bringing a lot of new leverage to the equation, but they need to work together. And I think it's the national government ultimately that provides what's often referred to as an open window where everyone can go. The investors tend to call it a one-stop shop, where you can go and someone is there whose job it is to enable this project to succeed and remain within the parameters that were promised to investors. And so I think that one way to essentially start this process is through a heritage revolving fund, which is a pretty common device, certainly in the Western world, but maybe not so widely used in developing countries. It offers, first of all, grants to help advance projects to the point that they can then be eligible for financing, particularly from the fund itself. Secondly, low-cost loans with a patient view of how long it's going to take for something to become financially sustainable. And then a repayment process whereby all those costs are recovered in principle, and the fund therefore becomes self-sustaining, something that becomes a tool for the community, for the country, to be able to continuously start up new projects and enable local players and give them greater sustainability themselves, because they can plan for the future, knowing that they'll have those startup funds. The best example of that I was able to find was the British Architectural Heritage Fund, which is one of the 6 case studies that we profiled, where they've done over the last 30, they've been in existence since 1970, with about 25 million pounds in resources, which is sufficient for them to service about 200 or 300 organizations across the UK that are in the business of renovating historic properties through adaptive reuse. And it has demonstrated itself to be a sustainable model. I think the other weakness in the heritage management proposition that I've seen from the financing perspective is the lack of an organization that is able to take and willing to take, innovative enough to advance a whole range of tasks that have to do with communication and promoting the idea and what they're up to talking to their investors, monitoring the status of each project, documenting the projects, serving as a capacity builder in an advisory fashion. And I think that built into this entire financial equation of a revolving fund, of a heritage fund that would attract both public and private players, you need to have an entity that is entirely focused on this purpose. It can be governmental, it can be non-governmental, and it can be private. I think the best model is non-governmental, but I think entirely depends on the impetus behind it and the regulatory system in which it's being devised. And so these are the ingredients of success as they were analyzed at the beginning, as hopefully they would be analyzed if these kinds of entities come into existence. Political will and charismatic leadership on the individuals who are going to make it happen. Measurable and social and environmental outcomes. A whole category of investors, impact investors, are looking for very tangible results being reported to them about exactly what kind of social and environmental results these projects have delivered. And I think our field has been slow in developing those kind of metrics. Risk mitigation, investment incentives, been talked about. Capable and empowered local partners who are given all the tools that they need to work with, and a transparent and efficient management structure. I think that this framework will work in almost every community, and I'm beginning to, what I'm finding is a great deal of interest on the part of public sector heritage management authorities in the idea of creating this kind of empowerment device on a national level or on a municipal level. And I hope, and I've had some very, very encouraging and interesting early stage discussions even during my stay here in Greece. So I hope that if there's another TMM conference down the road, I'll have more to report. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Bonnie. Some of the things that you have touched on, for example, the idea that the income in the beginning is not funneled back into heritage. And here in Greece, we had, I'm sure that Tonya has told you, that you know about it, the original protocol of agreement with the Ministry of Culture and the archaeological receipts funds and the municipality, where income from the various, archaeological sites could be funneled, not entirely, but to a certain extent, back into the restoration, preservation, and whatever of the sites, and that now is still pending. The renewal of this contract or this agreement that expired in 2003. But it is true, and that money that is received from the sites should be put back. And also your new look at public-private partnerships and the new formula. I mean, that's also, I mean, we do, as you said, you know, you've taken a fresh look at it and with new proposals that, you know, because, yeah, exactly. But still, even in the classic terms, most successful projects have been a mix and not just public or not just private. And then, of course, your methodologies, all of these things that you have analyzed through your research and surveys, rather, and the expansion of the pool of capital from the classic government and intergovernment. I mean, that is also important. I mean, finding new ways, because unfortunately, it's almost all about the money, you know? And so, but right. No, exactly. And the revolving fund that you mentioned. But Tonio and I, with your last slide, where you have the ingredients of success, we really like the first one, which is political will and charismatic leadership. That is, yes, most important. But thank you very much, and we will look forward to the next installment with more. Now I would like to give the floor to Eleni Maestru, please, for your always very interesting.
Thank you very much. My presentation, please. I think that, thank you, Mrs. Minaidi, thank you, Mrs. Moropoulou. I think that it is a very interesting topic, what we speak today. Okay, thank you. Because, on the one hand, we deal with the climate crisis, and the circular economy is a challenge that maybe could face with the climate crisis. And on the other hand, we have a big number of abandoned heritage buildings in the center of Athens, and not only in the center of Athens, in many historic cities in Greece, and also in many historic villages in Greece. So, speaking as a professor, we have many educational programs in graduate program and also in postgraduate program dealing with the reuse of heritage buildings. But I think that educational programs are not enough. I think we should educate our politicians, our municipalities to deal with this subject. Now, as president of a member of Hellenic Society for Cultural and Heritage, I can see that we have many struggles the last 2 years aiming at preserving the character of historic cities and settlements and, of course, of heritage buildings. And we tried to prepare a draft law to address the issue of abandoned heritage buildings, having a close collaboration with the Ministry of Environment. And I hope that this law will finally, we will see finally this law. The purpose of this law is exactly to establish a framework for the restoration and reuse of abandoned historical buildings, mainly those located in protected areas, in order to avoid their destruction and the degradation of the wider cultural environment. And at the same time, we achieve social and economic revitalization of the areas in which they are located. And another project that we made many struggles for it, it's to implement a financial support program to finance the restoration of private heritage buildings. This is something that the government has many times has say that it will go on, but until now we have seen nothing. Now, what I want to show in short is the relation between circular economy, between the concept of circular economy, sustainability, and urban conservation. What means the reuse of historical buildings? Well, the concept of circular economy involves sharing, leasing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, etc. According to European Parliament, moving towards a more circular economy could deliver opportunities including reduced pressures of the environment. And this is very important. Of course, we have challenges as financing, key economic enablers, etc. The built environment requires a vast amount of resources and accounts. The construction sector is responsible for 35% of the total waste generation. So, the reuse of historic buildings is very, very important. The reuse of buildings in general, but the historic buildings that are stone buildings that have a very big time of life is much more important. Now, reusing these abandoned or misused buildings, it has many benefits. It preserves the historic character of the city, it preserves the local culture that defines communities, it revitalizes public space and the whole surrounding area, and it achieves sustainable economic development through cultural tourism in urban areas worldwide. But decision makers lack knowledge of the environmental benefits of adaptive reuse of cultural heritage buildings. And this is a problem, I think, in Greece. Now, according to the definition of sustainability of Brundtland's definition, is that existing building stock can fit into promoting redevelopment within the urban core and promote long-term revitalization. The term sustainable development and the concern of for the environment have been introduced as a recommended strategy to combine what has been regarded as conflicting goals. It stresses the need for the carrying capacity of natural systems and integrates environmental and social concerns. Sustainable development is a development that meets the need of the present without compromising the ability of future generations. This is well known. Now, urban conservation has as main aim to keep the past as part of the feature of the built environment. And it adopts the principle of a controlled growth development while protecting the natural and cultural environment. I can say just two theoretical texts, the Declaration of Amsterdam, that realizes that architectural heritage is a capital of irrepressible spiritual, cultural, social, and economic value, and the above constitute the major preoccupation of sustainability, and according to the Nairobi Convention, that is also very well known, says that maintenance and revitalization of historic areas is needed, and the governments and the citizens should safeguard the heritage and integrate into the social life, but also grants, subsidies, loans at favorable rates or tax concessions should be made available to owners and to users carrying out work provided for safeguarding plans. And that is what is missing from us, from Greece. And this is a last image where you can see exactly what is the relation between the basic principles of sustainable development, urban conservation, and circular economy. Maintenance of ecological systems, conservation of natural and man-made environment, minimum overall natural resource extraction, and of course, developing of local resources, maintenance of local resources, reduce pressures of the environment, and reuse and conservation. Finally, what use of new uses we want in the historic buildings? The loss and the substitution of traditional uses, such as traditional residential use, can have major impacts on historical towns and urban areas. Without the recognition of the nature of these changes and the opportunities which could arise, this could lead to the displacement of communities and loss of cultural practices, leading to loss of identity and character of places. It can result in the transformation of historical towns and urban areas into monofunctional and monocultural areas oriented to satisfy leisure or tourism needs and not suitable for living. It is also important to attenuate the gentrification process due to the increase of urban ground rent, to the loss of the quality of habitation, and the communal space of the historic town of an urban area. It is important to recognize that the process of gentrification can affect communities and lead to the loss of the place's livability and ultimately character. The retention of cultural diversity is important, as historical towns and urban areas run the risk of becoming a mass tourism consumer's product, which as a consequence might result in loss of an authenticity and heritage values. And this is our efforts of the Hellenic Society for the preparation of the law, as I said before, and the campaign toward the implementation of financial support to finance the restoration of private heritage buildings. The lack of finance for restoration of private heritage buildings is a very big problem in Greece, and we must face with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eleni, for informing those of us who not know about the new legislation, new laws that do refer to the renewal of public and private, hopefully, and private properties, and the financial support programs, and also the way in which you presented the relation between circular economy and sustainability. I mean, I think that is something that you know, people need to be convinced of the value of something before they will implement it. And I think that that is a very, very important aspect. Thank you so much. Right. So now we will move to the City of Rhodes. Yes, to the City of Rhodes, and to the Vice Mayor for the medieval city of Rhodes, Mr. Stefanos Dragos. Stefane, are you connected?
Can you hear me?
On the WebEx, Stefanos Dragos.
Yes, online. Yes, on the WebEx.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say that I'm glad to be here among such great personalities. I would like to congratulate Professor Moropoulou on this initiative for such an important issue as the protection of the world monuments. I'm still online.
We hear you. We hear you.
Okay. So our priority for our authority is a sustainable environment, first of all for local residents, and then for all those who are active within a medieval city. And I'm going to speak a little bit about our design and priorities of medieval city of Rhodes. So our monuments, apart from their historical and cultural significance, are an important parameter of the local economy and are strongly connected and correlated with the tourism. From the beginning of our duties, our goal as a municipality authority was to protect and upgrade the medieval city of Rhodes, respecting the monument history and combining all inside activities with each other. Until 2019, the medieval city was a city with many elements of pathogenesis, with the main problems being the traffic, the measure of public spaces, and the maintenance of the infrastructures. As an example of implementing a policy aimed at ensuring a sustainable environment, I will refer to the successful resolution of traffic problem. Thus, until 2019, medieval city was a place where cars were not typically allowed to move, but the reality was different, with over than 3,500 cars moving inside. Thus, with the aim of restricting the movement of cars, an integrated traffic control system was designed using systems of artificial intelligence, smart cameras, and giving transportation solution to the citizen by using municipality electric cars for free. Finally, the results of the measures was a reduction of traffic by 3,000 cars on average per day. But the planning did not stop the traffic problem. We are ready to sign with the Ministry of Culture the new programmatic agreement with the horizon of the next 20 years, with the aim of transforming the medieval city into a smart castle city. The main goal of the design is the central management of the city from an integrated system of real-time monitoring of the needs and problems that are created, so that with the appropriate resources, the solution can be given immediately. Many of the projects described in the agreement have already started and are being implemented by the municipality authority in order not to lose a single day of our term, recognizing the importance of the monument. For the end, I would like to dwell on the difficulties that exist in the implementation of the policies that come many times in contrast to the reality so far, that has led in many cases to the degradation of the monuments. Appreciating and evaluating the reality and the importance of the cultural heritage of our places, the most important parameters of the design and the theory is the determination of the implementation of that, isolating any kind of political, many times, cost. In closing, I would like to thank our mayor for this try that we do, the governor of Southern Aegean, Georgios Hadjimarkos, the Minister of Culture, Mrs. Mendoni, and finally the Prime Minister of the country, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, who will be our side in this difficult task. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefane, for giving us a picture of the efforts being made in the medieval city, first concerning traffic and circulation, the electric cars, the move toward making Rhodes a smart city, and all of the work that is being done in conserving, preserving, and managing, especially in the medieval town. Thank you very much. Now I would like to invite Professor Stefano Della Torre, so professor of the Polytechnic University of Milan in the Department of Architecture, Built Environment, and Construction Engineering. Professor, the screen is yours.
Thank you.
WebEx,
Thank you very much.
Online.
First of all, I want to thank Professor Moropoulou for inviting me and for putting my name in this panel. I have a short presentation. I try to share my PowerPoint. I hope it works.
A little bit louder.
So
louder.
I decided to speak of just a small, a narrow perspective of this very, very broad topic of the panel today. Obviously, I agree with everything that has been said about planning, about reusing abandoned buildings and so on. I just want to add something about the reuse methodology. The premise is that when we speak of sustainability for cultural heritage, we are saying that heritage is a non-renewable resource. And actually, circular economy is exactly the strategy to deal with energy, raw materials, and so on, in order to reduce, to avoid any waste, and to conserve resources of our common planet, and reuse instead of demolition and reconstruction is exactly what is perfectly fit. But which kind of reuse? We used to say adaptive reuse, saying that, suggesting that by reuse we can comply with modern needs. Of course, passing through adaptation works. And the question is if adaptation works respect cultural values, respect authenticity. On the other hand, cultural values and authenticity maybe play a role, and we have to underscore which role in economy and also in circular economy paradigms. If we speak of a four-domain scheme of sustainability, this is the popular icon of cultural heritage works for Europe, counts for Europe research 2015. We have to say that yes, cultural heritage counts, and there are value production mechanisms which go beyond the market values. And culture is very important for economy just because there are mechanisms which work beyond the market values. Therefore, we can state that cultural values and authenticity should be part and conservative reuse processes. And I think that the adaptive reuse approach does not guarantee this target. And this is what I thought observing some attempts, some trials to conceptualize adaptive reuse. That's why I introduce the term or the metaphor of coevolution. Coevolution is a different paradigm. It's not adaptation to the environment, but it is a mutual influence. So in this sense, we can say that cultural heritage has to adapt to a changing environment and to changing needs. On the other hand, the environment and the needs will evolve in a different way because of the presence of cultural heritage. This scheme has been already adopted for cultural landscapes and traditional agricultural landscapes, saying that they are living knowledge systems. And my suggestion is that also historic buildings are living knowledge systems, which are definitely important for what we can learn from traditional architecture and traditional buildings. And this approach can be very interesting for change management because it's a matter of way of thinking, how we can think not only the history of our cultural heritage, but also how we can think the strategies for next generation and for the future. So in this sense, reuse means to keep the potentialities for a coevolution. And in this coevolution, heritage will be able to produce new values thanks to the conserved authenticity, which will make possible the emergence of new relationships and new co-creation processes with the communities. The communities in the sense of Faro Convention, of course. So we can rethink the relationship between conservation and time, and so we can make a shift from restoration or adaptive reuse to conservation as a process, also introducing an approach centered on the users, and these approaches can support each other in the frame of a circular vision. Thank you for your attention. This is a picture of my campus, and I am so sorry I was unable to travel to Athens and to be with you today.
Thank you very much, Professor. I found it very interesting, the question of adaptive reuse and the issue or the question of ensuring authenticity. Authenticity, integrity, and further on, its outstanding universal value if it happens to be World Heritage. I found it not counter-evolution, I found it revolutionary, actually. But, and also the two sides of the expert-centered and the user-centered as well. It's a very, very interesting and I would say thought-provoking, because we are all for, of course, adaptive reuse and but one really must take into consideration how it's done so as not to compromise authenticity, integrity, or outstanding universal value. Thank you very, very much for that, Professor. And now, the time has come. I invite our dear Tonia Moropoulou, Professor, to take the floor. Tonia.
Thank you, Lee. Of course, we are in front of changing patterns of development and preservation within the crisis of environment, pandemic, and the socioeconomic crisis. And I understand very well that what my distinguished colleagues from the schools of architecture are saying, okay, good, because it deals with the agenda of UN 2020, which is focusing on sustainable development for epistic cores, historic cities. I cannot change it. Okay, here we are. Otherwise, we are threatened by a loss of identity. And we know what's the identity we are going to lose, but the question is, which is the identity of the world of today and the world of tomorrow? That's the question of the next panel. But it is actually articulated from whatever we have said during this conference in the panels, and especially here, referring to the historic cities. And according to this question, I wouldn't like to answer theoretically, because as Bonnie Burnham said 3 years ago, I'm so sorry about that, preservation of identity is not a luxury, it's an economic imperative. And she was saying that, quoting the Nobel Prize Robert Merton Solow. So I would like to focus on that point, because if we do not plan on feasible and realistic plans, what we will lose is the chance to preserve our identity, constructing on it for the identity that the world is going to have tomorrow. And that's why I would like just to refer to this pilot project we actually initiated some 40 years ago in Rhodes, and that was the cultural rehabilitation of the medieval city through youth initiatives, which succeeded to establish Rhodes, the medieval city of Rhodes, at the World Heritage List of UNESCO. It was enlisted at 82 after some years, through which, first of all, local population participated actively, and the local authorities, to this effort. And that made it feasible to be understood by UNESCO that these people will have a future. They will be capable to sustain the unique identity of the medieval city of Rhodes. And this question, as posed by Lee, is still open today, because at that time we succeeded to have a program agreement between the Ministry of Culture and the municipality, which actually gave a grant to the historic cities through their organization to move towards a new allocation of power from the central governments to the local governments and to the civil society, which is the new trend of today. But what is happening today, and how could that be realized in a feasible plan? Because, okay, 40 years ago, we succeeded to set on the table this issue. What about our capability to preserve the medieval city? And I'm always speaking not only of Rhodes. Rhodes is the paradigm, is the problem, is a potential solution. These are questions that apply to all cases. The strategical planning for the sustainable preservation of an historic city, which are set through concrete requirements by UNESCO plan, should be studied, and they concern all the problems that are problems of threatening the historic texture, the historic architecture, the historic structure, the historic materials, by environmental factors intensified by the climate change. That's a great problem. We have studied this, and it is not only visualized, as you might see, through non-destructive testing and architectural design, but it is assessed and quantified as well. And this assessment shows that if we want to go to reuse the historic buildings in order to revitalize the medieval city in a way that we would be able to preserve it, to develop revenue in order, through circular economy, to invest in the general public interest of preserving the medieval city, because it's not feasible to give millions and billions through the Ministry of Culture and through the state always to spend if the heritage is not capable through social, economic, and political initiatives to produce revenue, which will be invested for its protection, then we have lost the case, and we shouldn't lose it. That means if we are speaking of the reuse of stock of buildings, and in Greece, a massive case of stock of buildings concerns Athens and Rhodes. We have 1,500 buildings of municipal and public ownership, historic buildings, in the center of Athens. And we have 340 in the medieval city of Rhodes, which were accumulated through history and which, due to the Italian occupation, were transferred to the Greek public through municipality in Rhodes. In Athens is a bit different evolution, but it exists. So we cannot speak of reuse in a theoretical way. We have to speak in a way that reuse will be according to the classification of the buildings, according to features, and we have worked out with Professor Maestro in Rhodes to classify with our students in the master course of protection of monuments 160 buildings of public ownership according to features which would apply to touristic reuse, to commercial reuse to revitalize local arts, crafts, techniques, etc. International purposes reuse, which would comply with the extroversy of the medieval city of Rhodes through history, and which would combine Rhodes to its international role. And then, when we applied all these classifications and potential reuses to the actual urban plan, we saw a lot of contradictions. That was meaning that reuse could not be examined out of the urban texture and out of the compatibility that the reuse would have not only with the values, but with the actual functionalities of the city, which could not accept in the same neighborhood a restaurant, a noisy restaurant, a music hall with a touristic infrastructure. That means there has to be a second level of assessment and evaluation. And that means a specific spatial plan, as we say today. And of course, all the care that Eleni Maestro and the Hellenic Society is taking, along with the Greek government, to establish a law in order to give incentives and to put a framework for the restoration of historic buildings, is not enough if in every case, in every city, in every historic core, historic center, there has not been examined on the urban planning the case of reuse and of preservation. However, with this data, and for 50 years, we performed on this stock of buildings a project of combined reuse, which, as studied from the point of view of the feasibility of finance and this judged by the revenue produced, we understood that there could be established a program which would be capable to return the money invested by private and public resources to sustainable preservation of the major monuments, to the maintenance of the old town's infrastructure, and to the provision of subsidizing public housing in order to comply with the need for social preservation as well. That was a very interesting work, which at the next step would be managed on technical level in the spatial data, and on the social and economic level on developing a new institutional framework to perform this. And of course, I should say that apart from the technical tools, we need, as Bonnie said, political will, and we need interlocutors, leaders, charismatic leaders. That's what we are seeking for. And I want from here to say to my friend, the Vice Mayor of Rhodes, Stefanos Drakos, that yes, indeed, is a great move to go to a smart city. But this smart city should be preserved. And we have to undertake this responsibility as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tanya. You've touched on so many crucial points, one of which, of course, that Bonnie had referred to as well, the preservation of identity. And also, of course, its economic value and as an economic imperative. But the thing is that identity, and that is the identity that we have from our cultural heritage, is what sets us apart, what makes us different, what separates us from other places, which transcends and rather mitigates the pressures of globalization and everything being the same everywhere. Our cultural heritage sets us apart in a positive way. And your referral, of course, your reference rather to the pilot projects and those that led up to the inscription of the medieval city of Rhodes in 1988 on the World Heritage List. And also with the Protocol of Agreement, the creation of the Office of the Medieval Town, where you have the municipality directly involved, not only the archaeological service, but the municipality as well. Very, very important. Also, the environmental actors, climate change, but something that the Vice Mayor referred to as well, concerning traffic and cars, which just the vibration of vehicles within the city, within the medieval city, has a definite negative impact. And so the introduction, of course, of these electric vehicles that can transport residents and whatever is also of importance. And all of the research and classifications that you and Eleni have carried out, which are necessary in determining what should be, what can be, restored, adapted, and whatever. And this is very important. And of course, you touched on zoning, land use, making sure that you don't have a noisy restaurant or bar in the middle of a residential area, and the idea of a spatial plan. And of course, the social preservation, which is all important. So I think really you've said it all, just about. Thank you very much. And I think you've given us all a better understanding of the situation in Rhodes, which of course can relate to so many other cities and historic centers. Thank you very much, Tanya. And now to our rapporteur.
I have nothing to say because our moderator has summarized very well all the points that were raised by the speakers. But nevertheless, I
You have to give your own slant.
few points that were raised. First of all, it's true that today's presentation was really thought-provoking. It was stimulating and enriching, in the sense that it tries to put us against the regular way we approach cultural heritage and cultural heritage preservation, and it brought forward the necessity to put it in a contemporary context where we have various challenges, and starting from the artificial intelligence and the advancements in technology and the opportunities it provides us to look at various ways of using this, and also not only to use it, but also to rethink the way we approach our own lives, particularly in historical cities. And this is what I think this is the main message that came around. So there are shifts, and there are shifts that need to be considered in terms of natural and cultural heritage preservation, of course, but also in terms of the way we have treated, we have approached our heritage itself as a patrimony, something out there which needs to be protected, of course, but which needs to be reconsidered and try to put it back in our lives. And this is the concept of circular economy, at least in the context of cultural heritage. So what was raised was the necessity to approach, to change the way we think about things. We have to think of what is the role of the local community, what is the role of science and research, and how it has to provide stimuli and to the community to rethink the way it is approaching its heritage. And also it has to do with visitors, tourism, because as we know, in historical cities, a major attraction and a major economic sector that leads to their development and redevelopment is tourism itself. And of course, we have also in tourism several changes that we have to consider, which is what was already mentioned, the sustainability as a major context, and that means there is a broad framework within which we should seek to develop tourism, develop our local community, the three-pillar system, which is social equity, economic efficiency, environmental conservation, and the balance among these goals. And the circular economy is trying to put back the concept of trying to connect all these three together. And it's not doing a little bit here, but also thinking of the other two, but it's trying to create really a dynamic that puts us to rethink the way we approach the development of historic cities, and of course the protection of our cultural and natural heritage in this context. And of course this has affected tourism, as I said, because we know that already for many years we talk about responsible tourism. That means the visitors that are attracted by some elements in a historic city, they also have to respond in a proper way in terms of responding to local society needs, and not only to the economic part that is contributing with spending money or visiting museums, etc., but also to try to integrate as much as possible their visit into stimulating and taking advantage of a society that exists, and stimulating also social innovation and cultural innovation and all that. So it is a matter of identifying certain steps which have been called ingredients this is political will and leadership. I'm just repeating what has been said already. Measurable outcomes, both in terms of society and environment, because the economy is there already. Risk mitigation and investment incentives. Try to stimulate capable and empowered partners, and then have a transparency in terms of the management schemes, etc. So the whole idea is not that we don't have ideas. The problem is how to come up with a way to integrate all these perspectives and approaches and tools that are available into a management framework. And of course, we know that more and more the emphasis is put into managing a historic city from the point of view of a local society needs, and trying to, and actually from the tourism side also, we approach it from the destination management perspective. That means we try to put more and more emphasis on what, on the responsibility of the destination, that means the historical city, to come up with policies and measures that stimulate visitors to behave properly, but also it provides them opportunities, and also linked to opportunities to the local community. And so enabling stakeholders can have several perspectives, not only stimulate them that yes, you have to do something, okay, we have to do something, we have to provide a proper framework to do that, both in terms of governance, that means ways of linking public-private sector, also NGOs, the civic society at large as well, but also to try to create a scheme that focuses not only on the phase of stimulating people and try them to get involved, but also to manage it. That means create the conditions so this, so their actions are effective and efficient, so, which means they have to have a proper framework of reference, an organizational component, could be public, could be private, could be public-private partnership. We heard different options, and that this also would be responsible to incorporate risks and also link it to the economy itself, meaning trying to find the proper tools of financing and supporting these kinds of activities, and only financing in terms of what we know already, but also stimulating the economic development through finance. That means provide opportunities for that. So essentially it's about an enabling framework which is integrated, and this is what we have discussed, I think, so far. And I'm sorry if I missed a lot of interesting things, but I think the moderator provided us the entire detailed spectrum. Thank you very much.
No. The rapporteur gave a complete picture. The moderator just, so no, please, thank you. So would there be either any questions or any comments, either from the floor or from online, before we close this panel? Is there?
I think we are passing to the next
All
panel.
right.
Just a phrase.
Yes, yes, of course. Sorry?
Oh, το μικρόφωνο.
Well, I wanted to ask Mrs. Loizou, General Secretary of Tourism, if you have proceeded with the capacity studies of these historical cities, and not only historical and touristic, the capacity.
The bearing capacity.
Yes, because that's it's critical. Because until now, for instance, we design ports for cruise boats that they can bring, for instance, in Zakynthos, they can bring 1 million people per year, which is outrageous. I mean, no one would want 1 million people per year in Zakynthos. But there are no studies, and Santorini suffers a lot of that. There is a study that Hellenic Society has already completed, but I don't know how it's going to be used. And on the other hand, I would just want to refer on the remark that has been made about the money that come from the archaeological sites. They all go back to the archaeological sites. They do. And until recently, actually, because now 60% of these funds, if I'm not mistaken, it's 60%, we only get the 40% of this money. The 60% go to our debt in Europe, as the rest of the income of the Greek public. So, as far as Rhodes is concerned, and other historic cities, that they also are written in the list of UNESCO, under the protection of UNESCO. I must tell you that the people in the Greek ministry, they are working very hard to ensure that each and any intervention concerning either the fabric itself or the use of the free spaces or of the building itself, of the buildings, has to go through many steps until it gets approved. That's why we get a lot of pressure for working faster, but that not means working faster is ignore the details and go forward. So we work very hard on that, and it's the Central Council of the Greek, of the Hellenic Ministry that approves and all these interventions, and we are very, very cautious and very careful. The problem is that many times they don't get our permission, or they go on and do whatever they want, and or they get just permission from the Ministry of, from the local mayors. Greece is not yet, has not been proved that local governors can control efficiently the protection of heritage. So I have to say that. Okay.
Thank you. If I may also respond, because, all right, I have served as Deputy Secretary General of the Organization of World Heritage, but also I've served as Deputy Mayor of Rhodes. So from 1991, there has been an effort, unsuccessful effort, and on behalf as well from the Ministry of Culture, to establish or to pass a presidential decree, a land use. This is pending, as well as far as UNESCO and the great distinction given to all, of course, sites that are inscribed on the World Heritage List. At the time of inscription of the city of Rhodes, a management plan was not required. Now, management plans are required by all sites being inscribed, and it is retroactive for cities or sites that were inscribed before. That is also pending for the city of Rhodes. And also concerning the revenue from sites, of course, money is returned back, but not proportionally, shall we say. The stress, the wear and tear, for example, the palace, the Grand Master, or other parts of the medieval town are greater than perhaps other sites throughout the country. The revenue brought in by the sites on roads is much greater, and it is distributed, perhaps not totally fairly, because we on roads do have a need. I mean, we have a lot of traffic, as you said, and you referred to the cruise ships and the this and the that. Of course, that is, there are many groups, one of which is the Organization of World Heritage Cities, that has worked with the cruise organizations and cruise lines in order to stagger the schedules. This we know. And I could even see that this year. I don't know if it's just by chance, probably not. I'm sure you are responsible for it, that we don't have 5 cruise ships with 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 passengers, in one day. But I think I should leave the rest of the response to our Secretary General.
Too many points. Of course, we have worked together many times before with the Ministry of Culture and especially Mrs. Androulidakis. So she knows that we at the Ministry of Tourism really believe in sustainable tourism development. And we have many initiatives to these directions, and DMOs is one of them. And of course, I understand the concerns of cruise development, but berth allocation or other tools are there so as to have the best results. I'm sure that we will have the opportunity to discuss in details. I don't want to reply, let's say, to every single point, but I would like to highlight something. Cultural heritage is a comparative advantage. Preservation, but also reuse and circularity lead to what I could, let's say, name cultural reality or contemporary and future life. So this will turn a site, which is now for sightseeing, to an experience, not only for the visitors, because of the ministry, but also for people who live exactly. This is, I think, the common priority.
Yes, of course, the experience. Are there any other either comments, questions, issues? Anyone? No? So I think then, thank the panelists who've done a fantastic job in presenting the various aspects of either circular economy, adaptive reuse, and so many other issues, as well as our rapporteur, Robert. Oh, well, and of course our organizer, our dear friend, Tanya Monopoulou. Thank you very much, and we move on to the next
Thank you, all
panel.
of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I have the pleasure now to invite the next panel, which is actually the one closing the conference. It is the panel discussing recapturing the world in crisis